Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. We've been very lucky to talk to a ton of incredibly inspiring and knowledgeable guests, and we've largely been focused on real estate. It's been really cool to bring in some entrepreneurs as well to the podcast so we can see how you can also use business to help you practice medicine and live life how you want. And this guest was no different. I'm going to be honest, this guest was someone who I was looking forward to talking to greatly, and I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. I learned so much information that's going to be so beneficial for me in the future, and I'm sure many of our listeners here. During this podcast, we don't really talk much at all about real estate. We talk a lot about direct primary care and what that looks like, and the freedom that you can have to practice medicine truly how it should be practiced, how to have 40 minutes, an hour-long appointment times with patients, see much less in terms of patient volume, but provide so much higher care and become such an integral part of medicine and care in the community and to your patients. Today's guest is Dr. Gupta. She is a family medicine physician who has been practicing for over 20 years. She's worked in academic practices, HMO practices, urgent care, and she talks about her journey through medicine and how she actually ended up working for an urgent care who just stopped paying her. And that led to her being unhappy with the pace and emphasis on volume in healthcare, and led to her opening a direct primary care practice in 2018. Her journey is very inspiring, and her just completely abundant willingness to share with us and to share with the community was so much fun. This was such a refreshing conversation, learning about how she became a direct primary care physician and how that introduced her to the world of entrepreneurship. It restored her joy in medicine and has allowed her to practice medicine the way that she wanted to. She shares everything that you need to know about starting a direct primary care practice, what that looks like, how to get patients in your clinic. We talk about drawing your own labs and ordering your own labs. We talk about how much money can be saved for the healthcare system and for the patient through a direct primary care practice. And you're probably thinking, well, you probably have a big drop in compensation as a physician, as a provider working in a direct primary care practice. And that's not necessarily true. So you're going to want to listen to this episode. I promise, if you're a family medicine who is working in the grind right now, seeing 18, 20, 25 patients, you're wondering, how can I practice medicine how I want to? Maybe direct primary care is the answer for you. So if you learned something from this podcast, please share it with a friend. This podcast is free, and the way to pay it forward is sharing it with someone who's going to gain value from it. So I really appreciate that. Without further ado, let's get started with today's incredible episode with Dr. Gupta. Welcome to another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to be less focused on real estate and more focused on entrepreneurship. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a long time, and so happy to introduce you all to Dr. Gupta today. Dr. Gupta, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I know I'm so glad that this worked out, and I'm so grateful for your time and grateful for the conversation that we're about to have.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, we'll go ahead and get started. If you don't mind just kind of sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey into medicine, that'd be incredible.
Sure. So I'm one of the older docs. I'm in my early 50s, so I trained in the 90s, general family medicine, just like you. And so I started just with an academic job, and then my career sort of changed as I followed my husband through his fellowship, and then along with where he was working, and then over the course of starting our family. But I worked for several years at 𝐒𝐻𝐭𝐻𝐻, which is a large HMO on the West Coast, became a partner there. And then we left California, we moved to the Midwest. I worked in urgent care for several years. And then my life took a turn when I found myself having to leave urgent care and looking for just a good fit for where I was in my life. This was about 5 years ago. And the landscape at that time was very limited in terms of opportunities for part-time or wanting to not to work in the hospital if you didn't want to, not having to be on call if that wasn't where you wanted your focus to be. And pretty much the options were only work for a large group or not. And I started looking into concierge medicine, and then I stumbled upon direct primary care. And once I learned about it, I thought, oh my gosh, this is what I have wanted to do. I can't believe this is a possibility. And there were so many features about it that just made sense. And the fact that other doctors were doing it and making it work just made it very appealing and possible.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing your journey. Yeah, you've definitely probably seen family medicine change drastically over these 20 years and so forth. And I'm sure you've probably seen residency training change as well. I know you spent some time in academic practice in the past as well. And so I think back to the stories I heard about the 100 hours being on call for 36 hours, 48 hours, all that stuff. I'm sure you experienced that. So I can't complain about the few 24-hour calls that I had to do by any means, but very grateful for folks like yourself and who were involved in my training and residency and just taught me so much. So I'm sure there's plenty of doctors who are really grateful for the teaching that you provided back then, and then also the teaching that you're doing now and sharing direct primary care, which is just such an incredible and exciting avenue of family medicine. What was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for the transition out of urgent care and private practice to direct primary care for you?
So the personal reason for me was I was working for an urgent care. I thought I would be there for quite a while. My kids were little. I was able to work a couple shifts whenever I wanted. And ironically, that urgent care was more of kind of run like an 𝐓𝐻𝐶Q. We had a lot of Medicaid patients. A lot of them came back, and I kind of had a little continuity panel. I was working with underserved and a lot of uninsured patients. And so I was actually seeing a lot of the finances behind healthcare without realizing it. And I would kind of ask the staff, this patient doesn't have insurance and we're doing a GC chlamydia. Why are we charging $125 for this swab? And they would say, well, that's just the price. And I would just think, that just seems like a lot of money for a lab test. But I just didn't understand why things were so expensive when you're paying out of pocket. But I just thought I'm going to be there until life changes again and I'm ready for another branch in the road. And then the company started to run low on money and just flat out stopped paying my salary. And I couldn't believe that that could happen in real life. It turns out, too, they were behind on malpractice payments as well. And when I heard that, I just had to go. I'm like, you can't stick around with that kind of risk over your head. So when that happened, I started looking around for other opportunities. And that particular job was just disillusioning in the sense that a company can treat a physician that poorly. But even prior to that, all of my other jobs had been the same story of high volume. And from my first job out of residency, I always had this nagging feeling that this isn't right. This isn't right. This is not what I thought I would be doing. There's this disconnect between the way I want to be in the exam room and the way I have to be. The minute I walk in, I'm stressed. I'm counting the minutes. At Kaiser, patients are waiting to see you for like a month, sometimes 2 months. They've got this long list. And no matter how you learn customer service and how to trim it down, it's just exhausting. You can't deal with 5 problems in 15 minutes. You just can't, right? It's impossible. Mm-hmm. And so doing that year after year, and like you said, the 18 to 20 or sometimes bumping up to 25, I mean, there are people seeing 30 in a day. It's just impossible. It's just awful. And even if you work through lunch and you bring the notes home, you're just not taking care of people the way you're supposed to do it. You just aren't. And so I carried that with me through all of my jobs, but I just thought, well, this is how medicine is. You get used to it, you adjust to it, you complain at home, and you figure out how to deal with the burnout, but there's no option because everybody you work for is telling you this is how many patients you have to see. And I would kind of cheat in urgent care because you could kind of slow down and kind of take a little longer with the patients and let them pile up a little bit and just leave them for the next doctor. So I would cheat and get a little more time with the patients until the staff would get mad at me. But the bottom line is productivity and volume are what's valued right now, right? Because healthcare is a business. And so with direct primary care, shall I explain what it is?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, if you don't mind. I was smiling through that when you were talking about it because I was thinking about, just my day today and the numerous patient lists that I had and trying to explain to them, hey, I'm really sorry that we can't hit all these things and I can't practice good medicine if we're trying to just like very quickly gloss over all these really important issues that you have. And it's frustrating. And I understand it from a patient perspective. It's hard to see the doctor. It takes time. You're taking time from work, et cetera. But it's really hard to practice good medicine when you have all those constraints. And I am still employed in seeing that many patients. And so I have to watch what I say a little bit, but I feel all those same stressors. And that's what kind of led to Physicians and Properties and the trying to figure out how to invest in real estate or entrepreneurship and how that can lead you to be able to practice medicine how you want. And you're a great example of that. It's just hard. There was a study, I can't remember who published it, but they were looking at if you follow the guidelines for family medicine and saw a normal patient empanelment, it would take 23 hours of time to like see a normal patient empanelment and follow the guidelines, quote unquote, to a T, which is unbelievable that study exists. And then here we are still doing the same things. And so anyways, this is a conversation that hits really close to home for me. And I know a lot of people as well. So thank you for bringing up that point and kind of some of the struggles that family medicine physicians are feeling all across America. And now to the shining light, direct primary care. Yeah, if you don't mind just kind of explaining what is direct primary care and kind of how that's set up, that would be awesome.
Sure. So direct primary care, in essence, is a model upon which a practice can be set up. And it's basically a no insurance model where you charge a membership fee and patients can join your practice whether or not they have insurance, and you provide care for that flat monthly fee. And so whether it's tends to average between $75 up to maybe about $120 based completely on age, so not on medical illness. And then whether the patient comes in once or 20 times, you charge that flat monthly fee. So no copay, no secondary bill for the visit, basically just like a gym. And you can, whether or not they have insurance, that's the only money that you are collecting from them. And then the second side of it is for patients who don't have insurance or anybody who wants to use this side of it, you offer other aspects of healthcare at discounted prices. So you're able to get lab work done at cost, which is usually 75% off of the retail. So think a CBC for $5, lipid panel for $6, right? A vitamin D for $15. Same with imaging. Typically, independent radiology that'll do cash X-rays, $60, EKG $45, CT scan $250, right? So everything geared towards offering healthcare at a discounted cash price, so that your ideal patient will typically be someone who has no health insurance, or it'll be someone with health insurance who wants access to you and time with you, but you're not going to bill their insurance for what you're doing. You can use their insurance for sending them to a specialist or for their lab work, but for the purposes of seeing you, you'll just charge them the membership the way you do with everybody else. And the way it tends to work out is that a part-time panel could be anywhere from 200 to 300 patients. A full-time panel tends to be about 400 to 600 patients. And so that translates to, I want to say there's an exact number. It's something like 10% of the total numbers, how many visits per week, but it ends up being so completely manageable. So with my panel I'm just about at 200. I am in the office 2 to 3 days a week. I try to see everybody Tuesday, Thursday, maybe a little bit of spillover on Monday. And I'll see anywhere. Sometimes it's like 2 people. A busy day is like 7 or 8. That's like a lot of people. So anywhere from 2 to 6 people, depending what's happening. And then a lot of virtual care because patients can call you, text you, email you. And it's very simple. It's just basically a membership model. And along the lines of concierge, but a lot less expensive and geared towards the common man and not necessarily just to the upper class, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, you know, basically membership style, but have access to you, almost like a 24/7 fitness, I guess would be a good way to look at it. You pay this membership fee, you have access to the gym the whole time, you have access to you the whole time. I know people listening to this, including myself, their thought is, oh, wow, I'm giving someone access to me 24/7. What does that typically look like? What does like call look like, or after hours messages, calls, et cetera? What does that look like for you typically?
is very manageable. First of all, because even 600 people feels a lot different than a panel does in a typical family practice. I remember ours at Kaiser were about 2,500, I think. So 600 is a lot smaller. So it's a 200. It means fewer people that are there to call. But part of this model is also being clear with your patients from the beginning that you are accessible, but you are not a concierge physician. So you're not going to anyone's house. You're not going to the hospital unless you want to continue rounding, and setting boundaries about when you're available. And so mine are during the week, pretty much 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., call, text, whatever you want. In the evening or weekends, it has to be urgent. And I sit every new patient down and tell them clearly that if they call me after 10 p.m. and it's not an emergency, I'm going to be really upset. And it better be an emergency or I'm going to be mad. And it doesn't happen. They do not call. I mean, knock on wood, it's been 5 years. And I think it's probably less than 5 times I've ever been called past 10.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, if they call tonight, feel free to call me too, because I jinxed you. But that's awesome. Yeah, I think that was certainly a fear a lot of folks have, is like, oh no, now they're going to be just calling or texting all the time. I think about it though. If I had the time to spend with a patient that they truly deserve, and as much time as I really want to really take good care of them, they probably wouldn't have a need to call me or send me a message, because we've handled everything in the office.
Exactly.
And it's just so cool. The model is just so cool. And I'm sure that patient satisfaction is through the roof with this, because they have that access. They're able to really get that personalized care. And preventative medicine, I'm sure, is very important in your practice. And I personally believe that preventative medicine is something that we have to get back to in America. It needs to be the cornerstone of medicine in America, instead of something we just push off to the side and don't really have time to really take care of, because we don't have time to counsel and treat appropriately. So I'm sure all those things help limit the amount of messages and phone calls you get, but also greatly increase the patient satisfaction and the care that they receive. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. And then also, I think some of it depends on how you style your practice. Every doctor is different. And so you attract probably what you put out. So my patient panel may be different than my friend, Dr. Ryan, who's 2 miles away, right? And how you set things up. But really, I was shocked to find out that I'll typically book an hour for a new patient and then a half hour for return patients. Sometimes if it's like I know somebody is a real talker, they're elderly, I'll book 45 minutes or maybe an hour. And I'll tell you that we never really run over, because if you think about it, like in traditional practice, you book 15, maybe 20 minutes if you're lucky. But if you have a half an hour, you'll just finish. And that's the thing, like we finish and they want to get back to work. Right? And like, we're just done and everybody's happy. No one runs late. Everything is smooth. There's enough time and no one's hanging around because they got other stuff to do. But yet in traditional practice, everybody's so stressed and everybody's like, what I mean, it's just like all the drama just because we're trying to be like 15 minutes. And if we just had like another 10, maybe it would. So it turns out you don't need that much extra time.
Yeah. I've been trying to pitch to the military that if they just increased our appointment times to 40 minutes per patient, would be able to do at least 3 times as much. Access would get better and patient satisfaction would be so much higher. And the overall health of the force and of the military would be way greater. But here I am still pitching it a couple years later. So we'll see. That's something I've been trying to work on and hopefully get that through, that, hey, we could really make a difference. And so hopefully we'll be able to do a small pilot study at our clinic and see and gather some data that will be helpful, because I know every single family medicine or primary care provider is feeling this and feeling the exact same way. And we all know, like, hey, this is the answer, but we're not the ones that are in charge of the numbers and we're not in charge of our schedule. And it just makes things a lot more difficult. I was thinking about your schedule. You're the one that schedules it, right?
Yep.
You don't have a practice manager who's dictating your time. How freeing was that to be able to have full control of your schedule and when you worked and all that?
Oh my gosh. It's the thing that I still enjoy the most. And it's probably the thing that I just don't want to hand over to anybody, because I want to know exactly who's going to be coming in when. I want to know when I want to leave early to do this or that with my child, or when I want to do an IG live, or when I want to do something else. I want to plan it all. And so it is just amazing. There are other DPC docs that will set things up so patients can self-schedule. You can certainly do that through your EMR if you like it, but I just love it. There are a couple different EMRs you can use for DPC, and they just make everything so easy. So you really don't need to start with an assistant of any type, and you can fully practice without an assistant if you decide to. You don't need a second person.
That's awesome. Let's go, if you don't mind, kind of nuts and bolts of setting up a practice. So what does it look like when you're trying to set up a direct primary care practice? Like, where do you get a clinic? How do you get supplies? Those sorts of things. If you don't mind sharing, what was that like for you getting things set up and ready to start seeing patients?
So the first thing I did is I read a book about DPC cover to cover. There are two good ones. I've linked them on my website that are great. And they were written by pioneers in the DPC world, Dr. Doug Farago and Julie Gunther. Both are excellent. And so I feel like once you have something in your hand, you feel a little bit more secure because everything you need to know is in there, right? But just like you probably did with your real estate business, you start with creating a business entity, right? And so starting the legal process, getting your business ID number, opening a business bank account so that all of your funds can be separate and clean. And then the second thing I did after that was start looking for physical space. Some people, believe it or not, start with no space, or people have converted their garages or a room out of their house or subleased. I decided to rent a small space in my town, and I on purpose picked a space with an extra room where I could always leave my kids if somebody was sick, or I never wanted to have to compromise a day of work because I needed to care for one of my kids. They could just stay there the whole day and I could continue on if needed. So business ID, business bank account, your physical space, you need to pick an EMR. With DPC EMRs, they aren't only charting. You are able to collect patients' credit cards, keep them on file, charge their monthly membership, and have all those funds sent to your bank account. You can also order labs or dispense medications, which is another nice part of DPC. You can order wholesale meds if your state allows, and then resell those to your patients with a minimal markup. And those end up being many times a lot cheaper even than GoodRx, right? So, I mean, a Z-Pack is like $2, but GoodRx might make it 10, right? So that they have a little bit of a profit. So you can get things at absolute wholesale price and then redispense them with maybe a 10% markup to cover your credit card fees and whatnot. And so your EMR will allow you to inventory those meds and then print the pharmaceutical label them, put them on your bottle, count the pills, and then dispense to the patient. And again, most states, your physician license will cover you dispensing medications. So yeah, labs, your EMR. Once you've gotten those big pieces, then you've got your physical space, right? So then you have to furnish it with the things you need for non-medical. So printer, desk, that stuff. Then you need your medical stuff. So your exam table, whatever procedural supplies, you get your space set up. And then after that, you want to start marketing. And so that's usually the part that's hard for most of us because we've never had to market before. And it's intimidating to sell yourself, but joining the chamber, going door to door, printed media, social media, just kind of getting your name out there to sort of start building your business. And then, of course, along the way, you have to figure out how are you going to pay rent? How are you going to pay for all these things until you have money coming in? You are perfectly set up because you have your secondary business that will probably keep your DPC afloat if and when you decide to open one. In our case, we use savings and just use that until my practice got off the ground and you break even, which is enough to pay your expenses. And then after that, you start paying yourself. And that took me about a year, which is pretty fast for a new business. And then let me think about it. So by the second year, I was starting to pay myself. And then by about the third year, I hit where I wanted to be salary-wise, and I was able to cap the practice. But you do have to plan ahead for how are you going to feed yourself and manage your expenses while your business is growing. Because it's not like you get a paycheck immediately, necessarily.
Yeah. Wow. That's really helpful. How do you order lab supplies? And I know it's been really cool watching your Instagram and just seeing what the day-to-day looks like. And I'd love to kind of hit like, hey, this is what your day looks like typically. But hey, these are all the lab supplies that I need to order and the different tubes and the different everything that goes into a lab, because we don't get all that training in med school and residency. How did you learn that? And how did you figure out how to order those different resources?
So that turned out to all come via the lab. So around here, we have two big labs. We have Quest and LabCorp. So I chose the one that was closest to me. And I knew I wasn't going to do phlebotomy, and I wasn't going to hire a phlebotomist because it was just going to cost too much money up front. There are DPC docs that will do phlebotomy themselves, but I just drew the line there because I didn't want to deal with spinning the tubes and all of that. That was where I drew the line. But once I called the lab, you set up a physician account where they automatically will give you 75% off the retail. And so they'll price out all of your tests, and you get anything you remotely want to order. They will send you a price list. ANA $4. GC chlamydia, turns out, are only $16, not $125. When you see these prices and you're just like, oh my God. And then so you have your price list, and then the lab rep oriented me to how to do everything. So she came and gave me an orientation. This swab is for this, swab is for this. You get a manual with what you use. And some of it you're a little bit familiar with from when you practice, and that hands you the swab, a viral culture, right? A strep culture, urine. And then the rest you just kind of learn. And most of it is very simple once you see it and write it down. But I'll tell you, in the beginning, I had to just go really carefully, check, double check. The tiger top is this one. The gray top is this one. Label it. Make sure you label it correctly, because you're doing the job of the MA, right? Unless you have, call the lab, make sure you do everything properly, and then wait for them to pick it up. Some DPC docs start with a staff member. I didn't. So I have been medical assistant and doctor from the beginning, but other people, maybe they transition over with a staff person, and maybe they had a practice where they brought patients that followed them, and they opened with 100 patients and money in the bank from day one. I opened with one patient when I had to grind to find patients. And so I did everything myself until I grew, and then I got an administrative assistant, but I still don't have a medical assistant. So I still do all the swabs and everything myself. And you just learn it because it's very easy, but you do have to just be detail oriented so you don't forget.
Absolutely. I would definitely need a good bit of practice with that. That's for sure. I feel like I'm always running to our lab and like, hey, this swab's for this, right? And she's like, yeah, I've told you 5 times. But well, that's really helpful. When you say at cost or the price, so is a patient, say that you're going to run a GC for $16, is the patient paying that $16 on top of their monthly subscription or their monthly fee that they're paying you as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some DPCs will bundle certain labs. Like they might include an annual panel, which an average annual panel is about 40. So they might say your membership is $100 a month, and that includes annual labs. Everybody structures it differently. Yeah. I decided from the get-go, I guess the way I looked at it was that my only income was going to be the membership. So I wanted everything else that was happening to be a pass-through. So I knew I wasn't going to make money on the labs, but I didn't want to lose money on them either. So I put a 15% markup on the labs. So instead of 16, I charged the patient $17.50. But that goes towards the tax I have to pay on the labs, the credit card fee I pay on all money, right? And then the extra pays for the exam room table, right? The printer paper, like the little stuff you have to keep around, Band-Aids and things like that, so that everything else is a pass-through, because I don't want to, again, lose money on anything. I want that part of the clinic to just pay for itself. And it's fine because at the end of the day, the patients are paying so little that the end justifies the means, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's incredible to see the difference. I've been reading more about direct primary care and listening to different podcasts, and hearing the price of labs at cost or medications at cost. It's unbelievable, the difference. It breaks my heart to see the difference, to be completely honest. And I live in the TRICARE world where everything's covered by TRICARE. So to be completely honest, I don't really think that much in terms of, hey, what would this cost be on the outside? I'm very much the type of physician that practices on I'm only going to order a lab or imaging if it's going to change my management, or necessarily like a need to
Sure.
get that lab or imaging, but it's still interesting to hear. And I'm sure that even patients paying for the labs probably helps with like the patients that come in and they just want shotgun testing in every lab imaginable because, hey, you're like, hey, now I can show you this is what you're paying for this and this. And I'd recommend this based off the guidelines and so forth. So I'm sure that's probably helpful at preventing waste as well.
It's really great because it's just very empowering because it also means that you can do things that are a little bit innovative and you can really partner with the patient and bring in other things that maybe aren't quite fully standard of care, but it's also, you're giving them the option to pay for it out of pocket. So for example, some of the newer lipid testing, right, like Lp(a), ApoB, and the NMR panels that maybe insurance aren't quite covering yet, but they're not that bad. And so you can discuss with a patient if you think somebody is a good candidate and it could be beneficial. And you don't have to deal with, are they going to get approved or not? And then same thing sometimes with imaging. Patients just, they're on the borderline of whether or not they're going to qualify to get an MRI or CT, or how long is it going to take? And what, just go on and pay the $250 and be done, right? Versus waiting and finding out, is it going to be covered, but because of your deductible, it's actually going to be $1,200 because you've got $6,000 to go before you meet your deductible. And so it's really nice feeling to help patients save money. It's like, it's just so nice when you can tell them, this is what it's going to be. And you can also give them the option. If they can't afford it, okay, all right, it's your money. So at the end of the day, I have to respect that too.
Absolutely. I think price transparency, I mean, that's a big topic right now in medicine and in politics as well. And I think that's going to be helpful. I don't think we're ever going to see medicine fully transparent in private practice. And I think there's a lot of money preventing price transparency from happening. So I think it's probably really refreshing for patients to know, hey, this is exactly what I'm paying for each thing. I know as a patient, I would be really happy to see that and know, hey, doc isn't ripping me off there. This is what I'm paying. And so I think that's probably really helpful and get some patient buy-in as well to their overall health too, which I'm sure is beneficial. If a patient gets diagnosed with something catastrophic, cancer, for example, and they need specialty care, specialty treatments, or imaging, how does that work with the direct primary care model?
Great question. So from the get-go, I usually encourage everybody when they join me to buy catastrophic coverage or join a health share, because I tell them the things we're doing together are going to be on the order maybe of hundreds of dollars, but obviously if you get in an accident or you have to go to the ER, it can run into the thousands. So please, if you can afford it, purchase some type of catastrophic coverage, right? But if they develop a condition that is going to need a lot of specialty care, we'll try, if we can, to have them see specialists piece by piece. But if it's turning into something complicated, then no matter what, I just tell them, you have to get insurance. There's just no way around it. Sometimes they'll qualify for Medicaid in the middle of the year based on hardship. Sometimes then they just have to wait till open enrollment until they can join. And it's just terrible because I don't believe you can join in the middle of the year. I think you have to wait until October to January to get on some of the marketplace plans. But yeah, sometimes you do reach a dead end because you just can't pay out of pocket for continued care when it starts to run into the thousands. And that's just how it is sometimes.
Absolutely. Do you have a network of specialists that you work with commonly and kind of like an agreement with them in terms of you being able to refer patients to them or at cost, or how does that work?
So no agreement, but I do have my own kind of database of independent specialists that I've built over the years that I work with. And I try to use independent docs, number one, to support them because they need the business that big groups don't. And they're so much easier to reach. I'm likely to get notes back. I don't have to call. It's not so hard to reach their staff. And sometimes many of them will give me their cell phone number so I can text. I'm friends with the head of the radiology facility. So I send her so much business that at any given time, I can just text her and say, what do you think I should do in this case? Is it better to do an MRI or a CT? And I don't want to order the wrong thing and waste her time either, right? So I have a nice database going, but there's no obligation for me to use them or vice versa. And sometimes there's a really good specialist that is a part of a big group or part of an academic, institution, or the patient just wants to go there. And if that's the case, that's what we do. And it's just harder to hear back, and it's harder to keep the chain of care going because I'm not part of their record systems, right? So I can't get into 𝐓𝐢𝐿 or whatever they're using to follow along. But most of the time I try to use independent docs though.
Okay, that's awesome. Do you feel like overall direct primary care's made you a better doctor and kind of more wide spectrum family medicine?
Good question. Yes, because I'm so much calmer. I enjoy it and I feel like I can be the doctor I always thought I would be. And that's a doctor that borders on a friend in a way. And there are times when you forget that time just passes, right? And you have time to enjoy patients and vice versa. And you have time to do extra because you're not stressed. And then the business side of medicine, I think also stimulates another part of my brain that I didn't know I would enjoy. It's very gratifying to run it in a kind of a tight way and see how can I keep costs down, where can I trim expenses, and now I've got a little extra money, what do I want to invest it in? What new piece of equipment could we do, or can we like amp up the technology in this area, something like that. But I do think it's made me a better doctor because I just feel that something is more complete and I'm doing everything myself. There isn't really anybody I can pass it on to. Like everything stops with me. So I have to figure it out, if that makes any sense. I have to go digging.
Yeah.
I have to go looking it up. I have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And then when I have to solve the finances behind it too. And some of the patients, because they're uninsured and they just won't go anywhere, sometimes they'll say, I can't afford to go there. Or then you have to find a solution or call somebody and say, hey, what can I do? Because I can't get them to you. What else can I do? You become more of a problem solver because it's harder sometimes to make use of specialists.
Yeah, that's a great answer and really refreshing to hear because I think sometimes we feel the pressure of all the patients that we need to see, and it's really easy to hit that referral button for something that we can handle as family medicine and have been trained to handle. But you think about, hey, this is going to require X amount of follow-up and time and procedures and et cetera. And it's sometimes, frankly, easier to just hit that referral button, if I'm being completely honest.
Yes.
Probably makes you stay more in-depth family medicine and really well-versed in everything instead of just having that comfort blanket of the referrals that is possible for you. So that's really cool and really refreshing to hear. What does a typical day look like for you when you're seeing patients? What's a typical day look like in the direct primary care world for you?
So right now I'm sort of switching out of summer mode into school season. And so a typical day is I'll start out at home, get my kids off to school. I usually try to do whatever exercise I'm doing first thing in the morning, so downstairs at the gym. Then I'll start maybe around 9 o'clock. Lately, I've been working from home in the morning, so I'll start emails, sending in refills, follow-ups, which are the things like sending out referrals, things I have to finish that are beyond just seeing the patient and charting, right? So I had to look something up, somebody, Ehlers-Danlos. When have I thought about that? But this mom thought her daughter may have it. Now I have to go dig up on it and read it. How do you diagnose it? How do you test it? All of that. So I'm reading up about it, right? And then what am I going to do with that? So all the follow-ups and then patients that have called and things I can handle on the phone. So I'll kind of do that in the morning. Right now, I'm trying to book patients starting in the afternoon, going backwards. So I want to work from home in the morning and then about lunchtime head into the office. So I'll start booking patients anywhere between 1 and 4. And then if I have others, then I'll move them up to the morning so that I don't really have to go in till 1-ish unless there are more, in which case then I'll go in however early is needed. So yeah, I'll head to the office around lunchtime, see the afternoon patients. If I get an add-on, then I'll add them in. I'm usually done anywhere around 4 to 5, and then I'll head back. And then just evening, helping with homework, helping with kids. I have a hard stop on my auto reply at 6:30 that says, please do not text after 6:30 unless it is urgent. And so once they see that a couple of times, there's no text coming in after 6:30 and I'm not answering it unless it's urgent. And so barely anybody texts after 6:30 anymore. And yeah, so right now things come in waves because obviously if you have 200 patients and 10% of them decide that they're sick on one day, it could be very, very busy. But part of that too is just you have to go with the ebb and flow. And I've also learned you can't let anything pile up because you have to always be ready that you could get a bunch. So that's why I try to keep everything moving. Handle it when it comes in, don't let it pile up unless it's really something like Ehlers-Danlos can wait a couple days, right? But other things, just get them done. Finish the notes, finish everything so that keep your inbox empty so that if you get a bunch of calls, you're not going to be behind the 8 ball, if that makes sense. But another thing is I feel that the practice has settled down. Anytime I take on new patients, then there's a little bit more activity. You're tucking them in, you're seeing them more frequently, you're working stuff up, and then they kind of settle down. It's probably going to get busy starting in October because cold and flu season will happen, right? I had a vacation in, when was it, August. So I worked super hard. Oh, no, let me share this with you. My daughter wanted to take a class in Chicago in July. How long was this class? I think it was 5 weeks. And because of her age, I knew I was going to have to take her into Chicago for the morning and bring her back. So for the entire month of Chicago, I rode the train with her, worked at a hotel in the morning, rode the train back to her, didn't tell any patients I was going to be in Chicago. I only brought patients in 1 day a week on Thursday. And no one knew that I was not in the office Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. I brought everybody in June that needed something routine. Everybody else that called, I said, oh, things are kind of busy. I'll see you in August. And everybody else who was urgent, I brought them in on Thursday for 5 weeks and nobody knew. And everybody was fine. You know?
That's awesome.
And so just goes to show you, you can plan things and make it work based on your life, your choices. But obviously, like everything else, you work, right? I mean, it's work. It doesn't run itself. There's still a lot to do, but it's really enjoyable. It's the most fun I've had in my entire working career. And my husband will say it's the happiest you've ever been. And it genuinely is the happiest I've ever been, for sure.
That's awesome. Super inspiring. What a cool opportunity to have the flexibility to be able to spend that time with your daughter too, as well. And you kind of answered my one question I was going to have. It was, how does vacations work and time away work? And it sounds like you just kind of rack and stack patients where you can, and then kind of triage appropriately and go from there. And that's how you're able to make that work.
I will say one thing about vacations. You can't have everything in life. So when I'm traveling in the US, I cover the practice myself. So I will tell everybody ahead of time, I'll be away. I'm only taking urgent calls while I'm away, but anything you need before I'm gone, I'm happy to take care of it. So refills, you want me to see something, check something, and handle it all. And then I man the phone and stuff while I'm away, but I make it clear that it's urgent. But if I go out of the country, which I try to do maybe once a year, then it's really hard. So for that, I share with Dr. Ryan, who is my friend who has a DPC in the town next door. And just for that particular circumstance, we cover each other because it's really hard when you're in another time zone. And that's just the one time of year you maybe want to be completely off and disconnected, because if you're manning the urgent stuff, you still are checking the labs to make sure nothing came in that is safe to leave and no imaging came in that's not abnormal. And if it is, you have to deal with it on vacation. So that is the price you pay for everything else being very doable. And that's just how it is. You can't have everything.
Absolutely. That would just be not working at all. You wanted to have, but then you lose on the enjoyment and how much fun it is to take care of patients. So yeah, I guess that makes it difficult. Well, that's really helpful. I had a question and I just blanked on it. So we'll just kind of move ahead. I want to be respectful of your time going forward. If you don't mind sharing, what's kind of the best piece of advice you got? And I'll make this a two-part question. What's the best piece of advice you've gotten in medicine, kind of in general? And then what was the best piece of advice you got for starting direct primary care, if you don't mind answering that?
Oh, okay. So the best piece of advice I got in medicine in general was a quote that I think somebody shared it with me in med school pretty early on. And it was, nobody cares how much until they know how much you care. And that kept me going, oh my God, it just through so many difficult times, because you just doubt yourself so much as a student, you doubt yourself as a resident, you doubt yourself as a young attending, and then you grow up, and even when you're in practice, sometimes you're running side by side with a specialist and you doubt yourself because you feel like they know everything in their area and what your family met, all that, right? So, but it really is true from a patient's point of view. Nobody cares how much until they know how much you care. And then when you do care, right, you go the extra mile to make sure that what you need to know, right? So that was the advice that I think allowed me to just stay confident enough to keep going and not give up in medicine. And the best piece of advice I got in direct primary care was from a friend who is an MD, MBA. And he told me, keep your overhead as low as you possibly can, and specifically look for the shortest lease with the lowest rent. And I was so happy he told me that, because when I was looking at spaces, a lot of the spaces we looked at were wanting to do a build out, which is where it's an empty space and you come in and you get to pick the cabinets and the doors and all these things. But then part of that, it's the rent then includes the cost of these things. And usually it's a 5-year commitment, which if your business fails and then you default on that lease, you're responsible for 5 years, and the lease may allow the company to come after your personal finances to pay off those 5 years. None of which I knew anything about because this was not my world. And when I learned that, I was like, oh my God, this is like way too much. And our friend was like, listen, just get a simple place with a 1 or 2 year lease. Don't do a build out. Just bring all your furniture in. And if it flops, take all the furniture out with you. And I was like, all right. So, and that's what I did. And I found a small space and I bought everything off Wayfair and everything worked out. But I knew that if it didn't, all I had to do was pay off 2 years, and I had enough money to pay off 2 years of rent, and that was it. So that was really, really, and I've passed that advice on to everybody. I mean, it's not always possible, but it's night and day in terms of the risk that you take out between those two options.
Absolutely. Those are perfect pieces of advice. Love that quote as well. I think that's an incredible one. There's also the quote, I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it's basically that hope is great medicine. That's a simple explanation for the quote that I'm thinking of, and being able to provide hope for patients, but also, genuinely feel like you care, and having more time with them and be able to build relationships and learn about their lives and become much more of a part of their life that you can with direct primary care, I'm sure just makes that understanding and compassion so much more real to the patient, and they appreciate that so much. So that's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. The last question I had, the one that I was thinking of, if you wouldn't mind sharing, and this can just be in generalities, in terms of kind of the compensation piece of direct primary care, is that similar to what private practice looks like, or less, or what's that kind of look like, if you're willing to share as much or as little as you'd like?
Sure. So it definitely varies based on where you live, the price point of other DPCs around your locale, whether you're going to be part-time, whether you're going to be full-time. And basically, it comes down to the numbers, right, of the size of your panel, your membership fees, and your overhead, right? So how you balance all three of those is going to determine your outcome, your income. And so I've kind of seen it across the board. And then also depending where you are and are you going to be able to fill. There are some practices that have not been able to fill and sadly have to close. There are some practices that just explode and they've filled within 6 months and they're full and like bursting at the seams. But to answer your question, in my case, where I am, I set a target of I calculated what 60% of a full-time family practice doc in this area would be. And I set that as my goal, and I set my hours to be 60%. That's why 3 days in the office, right? And I try to keep it to that. And I've been able to hit that goal. So and I hit that goal at year 3.
That's awesome.
And I really wanted to do that because I wanted to prove to other doctors that financially DPC is a viable option for doctors. And remember, this is 200 patients only, working 2.5 days in the office. If you open your panel up to a 40-hour week, and this is me with a part-time office assistant. If you open up 40-hour week with a full-time MA and you've got like a side hustle with aesthetics and all this other stuff going on, you can make far more. You could make probably 300, 400. There are family docs making, and that's also comparing salaries, right? I just heard, what did I hear? 150 for a full-time family doc in North Carolina. But then I also just saw 300 being advertised on Doximity. So the range is pretty wide, but if you take 200 to 250 as an average, right? I was able to hit like the 60% mark of around there. And that's what I wanted to show, is that that can be done and it's manageable and doable. And when my kids leave the house and I want to open up and do a little more, I might let the practice grow. I might take on more help. I might start doing weight loss, or the sky's the limit. This size works for me and the amount of time I have in my life now. But I absolutely think you can make as much as you can in an employed job or more, because you have the ability to bring on these other streams of income that you want to do and just add them into your practice. Do other stuff and charge for it. It's a business. Do it.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great answer. Thanks for sharing that. And glad that we were able to share that with the listeners, because I'm sure that's something that they were wondering, and definitely exciting to hear that as well, especially as folks are thinking about direct primary care in the future. We'll wrap things up. Where do you see direct primary care going in the future?
I think it's going to grow. It's loosely organized as an entity right now. We have the DPC Alliance that was put together a couple of years ago by, again, some of the vanguard, some of the earlier DPC docs. It's a really nice organization because they do a lot of education and outreach about this model. So I think that as more younger doctors hear about it, as more students hear about it, they might kind of entertain it as an option earlier in life than many of us who came to it after experiencing employed positions. And from what I'm seeing, my husband is employed in a large medical group. Degree of dissatisfaction that is there, particularly as groups are being bought by private equity, is just shocking. And more I'm seeing a trend of specialists leaving and opening independent practices. And so I think the willingness and the desire to do that's only going to grow, especially in your generation. So I think there's going to be more interest in it. There's probably not even barely 2,500 DPC docs, if that many, in the country. And there's a huge need because the ideal population, the ideal patient is still the uninsured patient. And what I learned that was news to me is that uninsured doesn't mean indigent. So I didn't realize that my ideal patient would be salon owners, restaurant employees, bartenders, landscapers, transportation, truckers. I mean, any small business owner probably doesn't have health insurance or is not offering it to their employees. And DPC is a fabulous option for them, combined with catastrophic insurance or a health share. And so those patients are everywhere and you just have to find them. I mean, you only need 400 to 600, right? So
that's great. I think that's really helpful. And I think back, I'd spent a lot of time practicing in some free clinics in med school and was in a preceptorship/honors program that was inner city and rural and global health. So it was all underserved medicine. I have such a huge soft spot in my heart for underserved medicine, which is why I really want to do family medicine. And I think you described our typical patient at one of the clinics, kind of your blue collar, working hard, can't afford insurance, could afford direct primary care, but those were the ones that were often falling through the cracks. And I think that's where direct primary care can really pick up the slack and get them the care that they need and deserve. So that's awesome. Thanks for taking care of those folks, and thanks for doing what you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I could talk to you all night, but we got to get you off here. And because I know that you're really busy and got a lot to do, and I'm really grateful for the time that we've had in this conversation. If folks are wanting to know more or reach out to you and talk a little bit more about direct primary care or see more about what you do, how can they reach out to you?
So I'm on Instagram at Dr. Aleea Gupta, and I'm on TikTok, and then my bio on Instagram, I think both of them actually link to my website. I have a page that is all about DPC resources, and then my email is over there as well. But yeah, happy to connect. And this was such a pleasure. I love what you're doing. I love that your entrepreneurial spirit, and I really hope that you'll be, as we say, in the DPC family down the road, and stay in touch, and happy to introduce you to others just in the community and on the platforms as well. But it's just been such a pleasure talking with you this evening, really.
Thank you so much. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation. I will definitely stay in touch, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We'll go ahead and wrap things up here with that. It's been Dr. Gupta, Dr. Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast, signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.